A very warm good evening to the August gathering here. Well, when I came in, I thought there was one tough act to follow. Now I have two tough acts to follow. Begin with the end in mind. I took this opportunity as soon as Raja sir suggested it because it gave me the chance to again read a book that I read probably like let's say 15 years ago, and I'm here to share the impressions that these habits have had on me rather than analyze or review the book. So for that you have to actually buy the book and read it. So let me start by first asking how many of you have actually read the book? Okay, very few. Right. So probably I should start out by explaining what Stephen Covey meant when he said begin with the end in mind in his own words. He says, begin today with the image, picture or paradigm of the end of your life as your frame of reference. Meaning what? Imagine that you're dead. People are there to grieve you. What are they going to offer as a eulogy? Now that's a pretty tough exercise. I understand you can do it if you're like say 73, 83. How do you do that exercise if you're like say 43, 33, 23, 13? You know, when I read the book 20 years ago, I had made a whole lot of annotations on the sides of the book. And when I read it now again, I could see that what Stephen Covey actually meant by a paradigm shift, a shift in the frame of reference. At every age, once in a decade, man's priorities in life totally change. So what is this begin in the end with the end in mind that Stephen Covey is actually talking about? The Kathopanishad says, life is like a river where the source seldom reveals the confluence. So here I am, midway somewhere in this life which is a river. Now I don't know what the end is going to be. I might live to be 50 or 80. Am I going to be healthy or sick? Am I going to be poor or rich? I don't know anything. And just when you think that life as a river has set itself on a smooth course, there comes a turn, a tumble. Sometimes it runs into a rapid. So how do I visualize the end in my mind? Now Stephen Covey gives an interesting example himself, where he gives this exercise to his students and tells them that, see, suppose you have only this semester to live, right? There you get a frame of reference, a time frame. Suppose you have only one semester to live, what would you do? Now this brings in an altogether different perspective, and the students, this is given as an exercise, the students are required to take a journal with them and record their observations over a week or a period of time, and then come about some startling revelations. As soon as your end comes near, then there is a shift in your priorities in life. Some of the students immediately call their parents. Some talk to a long lost brother or sister whom they haven't called at all in a long time. Some urgently make up with friends. Suddenly life revolves around different priorities and gets centered around principles. Principle centeredness is what Stephen Covey talks about here. Let me give a small anecdote. There was a philosophy professor who was trying to explain this concept to his students. So he took a jar, a big glass jar, and filled it with golf balls. Now once the jar was full, he asked the students, is the jar full? The students said yes. Then he brought with him a sack of pebbles and poured it into the same jar. Now as you know, the pebbles rolled around and took up all the space in between the golf balls, and then again the professor asked the same question, is the jar full? The student said yes. Then he took a bag of sand. He again poured it into the same jar. Then again the jar was full. Then he brought 2 cans of cold beer and poured it inside the same jar. Then again the jar was full, and the students found it very amusing, and the professor said, this, my dear students, is the point that I am trying to make. Priorities in life, starting with the golf balls. The golf balls represent all that is important to us, like our family, our friends, our health, most important. Then the pebbles, the job, the work, the car, the house. Then you come to the sand. The sand is all the trivia which fills up most of our life. Stephen Covey talks about life in terms of leadership and management. From Dr. Arvind's presentation, we understand that proactivity makes you a natural leader. Now, how do you apply this to your own life? Again, this anecdote brings it about. See, the trivia, every day we have bills to pay, errands to take care of, phone calls, the internet, all these frivolous things that eat up so much of our time. The sand is being effectively managed by managers. Now, you don't want to manage your life, you want to lead your life. So you have to shift out from being a manager to a leader. A leader is one who has his priorities right. So we all know, of course there are quite a few doctors here, that the one thing that we find very easy is to keep postponing that medical health checkup. All of us know that at the end of the day that is most important, but we never find the time to do it. So then we are bad leaders. So Stephen Covey says, first learn to lead your life. Be a leader rather than a manager. So at the end of the whole anecdote, one student, in the philosophy class, got up and asked, "Oh sir, what about the 2 cans of beer?" And the professor said, "Oh, I'm so glad you brought it up. How much ever life is full, there's always time for 2 cans of cold beer." So coming back to this beginning with the end in mind, talking about reprioritizing in life. Once a paradigm shift happens and there is a frame of reference, in this case the end of your life, as we just saw, the important things start taking priority, and then comes in principle centeredness. Suppose you say you have only a month or 2 months to live, you want to be good, you don't want to be bad, you want to be truthful, you want to talk kind words. Suddenly, where does this come from? It's always there within us. This principle centeredness is always within us. So what happened here is just a change or a shift in the frame of reference. Stephen Covey talks about a few things like security, guidance, wisdom and power. Now when we say principle centeredness, when we say security in terms of principle centeredness, when do we feel insecure? What makes us feel insecure? The changes that we face in life. We say change is a constant. But if you were to go a little deeper, one can see that what changes? What is changing in the world around us? The interesting fact is that anything manifested by man changes. Anything manifested by the universe, by God Almighty, never changes. So the character ethic or the principle value-centered living that Covey stresses again and again throughout the book is based on this changeless principle of the universe, which is, as you all know, anchored in good habits. People can't live with change if there is not a changeless core inside them, to quote Mr. Covey himself. So people can't live with change if there is not a changeless core inside them. Now, this changeless core is inside all of us, and that is what in Tamil we simply say Manasachi. That is the guiding compass. And if we have that as our guidance, then the next factor he talks about, wisdom, that comes automatically. So with security, guidance and wisdom, the next logical step he takes you to is power. Now what is this power? As explained by the doctor earlier, power is not something that has to come from outside in, but has to go from inside out. So what is this power? Now I perceive this as the power of discrimination. The power of discrimination is something unique which only human beings have, and we know what that is. Again, to quote Kathopanishad, it talks about the Shreyas and Preyas, that is the path of good versus the path of pleasure. At every point in life, we have a choice to make, and we all know the good choice versus the pleasurable choice. Now, I have sugar, and I have to take a sugar supplement with my tea. Now, that is the path of good, the good choice, putting it very simply. But the tea doesn't taste all that good with the supplement. I'd rather have it with sugar. Now, that is the path of pleasure. So, at every point of time, if you see right from the moment we wake up in the morning, And I don't see too many students over here, but most of you I think have teenage children. Waking them up in the morning is an ordeal, you know. So that is the choice or the discrimination that they have. They know that, or we know that, wake up early, have a couple of extra hours, you can still go on that walk which the doctor asked you to do. But then it's our discrimination, but we'd rather choose the path of pleasure. Oh my God, I went to bed only at 12:30. I'd rather sleep for another half an hour. And then there is always this something called the manas, the mind within us, which is always cheating, which is playing the monkey. It says you deserve that extra half hour sleep. Don't give a damn about what the doctor says. Another extra tablet would do the trick. So sleep. So this is how we exercise the path of discrimination in our daily life. There is always good and pleasant, and most of the times people like us, the average citizen, go through the path of pleasure. And then where does it take us at the end? As opposed to the intelligent few who opt for the path of good, which takes them towards the right end. Where is that end? So between these two, the beauty is, path of discrimination, this choice, is a weapon and an armor that God has given us. And no one has the ability to control it but ourselves. There is a very nice English movie called Bruce Almighty. I don't know if any of you have actually seen it, in which Morgan Freeman is the God and Jim Carrey is the hero. And this guy is always complaining about God not looking after him, God not doing things for him. How come everyone else is getting everything and I don't get anything? And God is sick and tired of his cribbing, and finally one day he appears in front of Jim Carrey. That's the hero in the movie. And he says, why don't you try being God for a week? Then you'll know the sort of headache I face. And then the movie goes on in a very humorous note, and how this guy, suddenly he's flooded with prayers, and he finds a program in the system to organize prayers and send replies and so on and so forth. But when Morgan Freeman, that is playing God, hands over his powers, he gives the guy one simple warning. He says, with my powers as God, you can do anything in the world except one: you can't control man. That power I gave to him when I created him. I never knew most of them would be this foolish, but I did. I gave them the power of discrimination. Actually, what happens very interestingly is that the guy is trying to get a girl fall in love with him, and he realizes even if he has God's power, he can't do that because the girl has the power of discrimination. So this is a point that he makes out, God makes out when he gives his power to the hero in the movie. This is very true of our life. We have this tremendous power within us, but are clouded by so many other things in life, so much so that we don't want to use this power, because using that power means taking responsibility for our lives, and that is a very tough call. Well, I'd rather blame my mother or my father, or being in Madurai, or having studied in this college, anything at all for what I am today, except for my own responsibility, which comes from my power of discrimination. So coming back to the analogy of the river, the source never reveals the confluence. At the beginning of life, no one knows where we are going to go and end. I'm very happy that when Raja sir introduced the whole topic, he mentioned the ancient Sangam literature works, which have a lot of works which talk about values. தமிழ் இலக்கியத்தில் இருக்கிற மாதிரி உலகத்தில் வேற எந்த மொழியிலுமே நன்னெறிகளை முதன்மைப்படுத்தி நூல்கள் கிடையாது. திருக்குறளை பற்றி இன்னைக்கு நிறையா பேசுகிறோம். ஆத்திச்சூடி, மூதுரையில் தொடங்கி ஔவையார் காலத்திலேருந்து நாம் இங்கே ஸ்டீவன் கோவிக்கு விழா எடுக்கிற நேரத்தில் வெளிநாட்டில் ஔவையாருக்கு விழா எடுத்துகிட்டு இருக்காங்க. நம்ம பிள்ளைங்களுக்கு நம்ம கொல்லப்பக்கத்தில் இருக்கிறதுடைய மதிப்பையும் சேர்த்து, வைர கற்கள் நிறையா இருக்குது, அதையும் சேர்த்து எடுத்து சொல்ல வேண்டிய கடமை இங்கே நமக்கு இருக்குது. They talk about these values day in and day out. இன்னா 40, இனியவை 40, நல்வழி, நன்னெறி, மூதுரைலாம் திருப்பி 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 இதோட சாராம்சம் திருக்குறள்னு சொல்லலாம், இல்லை திருக்குறளோட சாராம்சம் இது எல்லாத்தையும் இருக்குங்களா. But one thing that I loved about this book is throughout the book there is an undertone of spirituality. For example, if you take this chapter, begin with the end in mind, Stephen Covey talks about different circles of influence, which I will not go into detail now. You can buy the book and read it. That would be a better option. For example, there is one called spouse-centeredness. அது வந்து இந்த காலத்தில் யாருக்கும் அப்ளை ஆகாது, ஆனால் எங்கள் ஜெனரேஷன் வரலாம் அப்ளை ஆச்சு. அதாவது என்னுடைய விருப்பு வெறுப்புகள், என்னோட முடிவுகள் வந்து என் கணவனை சார்ந்து தான் இருக்கணும். எந்த ஊரில் இருக்கோம், என்ன வேலை பார்க்குறோம், வேலையே பார்க்க அனுமதியாக இருக்கா இல்லையா, இதெல்லாம் வந்து எங்கள் தலைமுறை வரையிலும். Stephen Covey wrote this book for our generation. இப்போ வந்துட்டா probably I think he'll just edit and remove that spouse centeredness, you know, because today the next thing he goes is family centeredness. இன்னைக்கு பார்த்தா அது கூட இல்லை. He ends the whole list with self centeredness. இன்னைக்கு பார்த்தா அது மட்டும்தான் இருக்குது. ஸோ அந்த 3 பக்கத்தையுமே எடிட் பண்ணிடலாம், அது நீங்கள் புக்கில் பாருங்கள், ஒன்று ஒன்றா வரும். பட் அதில் ஒன்று என்ன சொல்கிறாரு, சர்ச் சென்டர்ட்னஸ், வேர் தெர் இஸ் ஆல்சோ ஸ்பேஸ் இன் யுவர் லைஃப் ஃபார் ஸ்பிரிச்சுவாலிட்டி. When Raja sir was mentioning about sharpening the saw, he talked about 23 hours of sharpening for 1 hour of working. If you look at our spiritual philosophy, it will say that 23 hours of sharpening is meditation. சுவாமி விவேகானந்தா சொல்வார், பள்ளிக்கூடத்தில் நீங்கள் வந்து குழந்தைங்களுக்கு ஒன்று சொல்லித்தாங்க போதும், the power of concentration. The teacher's job is made very simple, but that is the most difficult. Once they get that power, anything else they can pick up like a sponge. அப்படின்னு அவர் சொல்லுவார். So again and again this theme of spirituality runs through the whole of the work. So coming back even to an example of a Holocaust victim's life called Frankl, which he describes in the book. Frankl சொன்னதா ஒரு ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட்டை இவர் கோட் பண்ணுறாரு. We detect rather than invent our missions in life. Think about this. We don't invent the missions in life, we detect them. இதுதான் நம்ம வந்து தலையெழுத்துங்கிறோம் தமிழில். இது யாரால வருது, எங்கேருந்து வருது, நம்முடைய ஃபிலாசபி என்ன சொல்லுது, இதுவும் நம்மக்கிட்ட தான் வந்து. சஞ்சித கர்மான்னு ஒன்று இருக்குது, பல ஜென்மங்களாக நீங்கள் சேர்த்து வச்ச மூட்டை. அந்த மூட்டையிலேருந்து அந்த ஜென்மத்துக்கு எதை எக்ஸாஸ்ட் பண்ணி முடிக்கலாம் நீங்கள் சூஸ் பண்ணுறீங்களோ அது பிரார்த்த கர்மா. ராஜா ஹரிச்சந்திரா கதையை படித்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா அவரை மாதிரி கஷ்டப்பட்ட ஒரு ஜென்மம் எதுவுமே இருக்க முடியாது. ஆனால் அவருடைய கதைக்குள்ளே நீங்கள் போனீங்கன்னா அவர் என்ன பண்ணுவார், அந்த சஞ்சித கர்மா இருக்கு பார்த்தீங்களா, பெரிய மூட்டை, கடவுளே இந்த மூட்டை எல்லாத்தையும் ஒரே பிறவியில் தீக்கிற மாதிரி எனக்கு ஒரு பிறவி கொடுன்னு கேட்டு அவராக வாங்கின வேண அவருடைய வாழ்க்கை. அந்த மாதிரி பிஃபோர் வி கம் ஹியர், வாட் எவர் இட் இஸ் தட் வி ஆஸ்க் ஆஃப் another life, we are given to by God. But once we come here, we are totally out of touch with our true nature. We don't know what the end is, we don't know where to begin, and we are a confused lot. And then we hate life at times because it keeps throwing unexpected obstacles at us. The river keeps turning sharp turns. The river keeps going into rapids at the worst of moments. So how do you tackle this? Again, philosophy shows the river, throughout all its turbulent journey towards the confluence which is the sea, simply enjoys going with the flow, simply enjoys the journey. And during its journey, it not only enjoys itself going with the flow, it enriches any living being that comes into contact with it. That is how we have to take life. We may not know the end, but we go with the flow, and as we go with the flow, whatever comes our way, we enjoy. And I think here, as Indians, we have a big plus to score. I will not say that destiny is fatality. There is a view in Western philosophy where they call the Indian way of blaming everything on destiny or shifting responsibility onto destiny is fatality. No, then God wouldn't have given us the power of discrimination. That again is shown through many stories in our Puranas. எதுக்கு வந்து வேதங்களை வந்து உபனிஷதாக்கி உபனிஷத புராணாக்கி புராணத்தை கதையாக்கி சொன்னாங்கன்னா அப்போ தான் நமக்கு மண்டையில் ஏறும். ஒன்றுமே இல்லை, சிம்பிள் திங் லைக் மார்க்கண்டேயா ஆர் சரி சாவித்ரி, வேர் வி ஹாவ் ordinary human mortals defeating death. Now God says, I can't defeat death, but man can. That is the power of discrimination. So that is the way that we are taught to approach life, that runs in our blood. Now taking it to the next level, which is not exactly what Covey would have probably meant, but which I would like to interpret as we are basically, Indians. இந்த பூமி வந்து நம்மளை ஆக்கிரமித்து இன்ஃப்ளூயன்ஸ் பண்ணுது. அதுலேயும் இந்தியாவிலே இந்த மதுரை இருக்கு பாருங்களேன், இந்த மதுரை பூமிக்கு வந்து இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் பவர் ஜாஸ்தி. நிச்சயமாக வந்து எங்கள் இடத்துக்கு ஒரு ஜிஎம் வந்தார் கொஞ்சம் நாளைக்கு முன்னாடி. அவருக்கு வந்து தமிழே ஜாஸ்தி பேச தெரியாது. எங்கள் இடத்துல வந்து 3 மாதத்தில் தமிழ் பேச ஆரம்பிச்சிட்டாரு. நீங்கள் எப்படி தமிழ் பேசுகிறீங்க அப்படின்னா அவர் சொல்கிறாரு, இந்த மண்ணும் இந்த தண்ணியும் எப்படியோ எனக்கு தமிழை சொல்லி கொடுத்துருச்சு. ரியலி. ஸோ தட் இஸ் தி எனர்ஜி ஆர் தி பவர் that this place, again a very interesting observation was made by Swamiji whom I met, Swamijiன்னு சொல்லவே வர மேடையில் பயமாக இருக்குது, இருந்தாலும் இவர் நல்ல சுவாமிஜி. இவர் வந்து ஒன்று சொன்னார். என்ன சொன்னார், ஏன் வந்து உலகத்திலேயே இந்தியா ரொம்ப பாப்புலர்டாக இருக்குது அப்படின்னா, now this is, I'm linking it with Covi's statement of begin with the end in mind. All of you know, as Indians, as per Indian philosophy, when we are born on this earth, what is the end in mind that we are taught to think about? Yara solunga paapom. This is not true for any other country but India. நம்முடைய philosophy end in mind அப்படின்னு சொல்லக்கூடிய அந்த எண்டை என்னவென்று நமக்கு இனம் காட்டுகிறது. இதை யாரும் நமக்கு சொல்லிக் கொடுக்கறதில்ல, பிறந்த நாள்லேருந்தே நமக்கு தெரியும். அதாவது கொஞ்சம் ஆனால் அதுக்கு வந்து அந்த ஸ்பிரிச்சுவல் இன்க்ளினேஷன் இருக்கணும். நீங்கள் எல்லாம் இந்த லெக்சருக்கு வந்த மட்டுக்கும் உங்களுக்குலாம் இருக்கோங்கிற தைரியத்தில் இந்த கேள்வியை நான் கேட்குறேன். எதை சொல்கிறாங்க? எக்ஸாக்ட்லி மோக்ஷம். மோக்ஷம். You go and try telling an American or a European the purpose of your life is moksham, he will look as if you're crazy. But we accept it. We know, within our heart of hearts, we know that salvation is the end in mind for every human being. When I started thinking about this, I started realizing, oh my God, I'm on the other side of 40, I'm getting old. So begin with the end in mind. The meaning it had for me about 15 years back or 20 years back when I read Stephen Covey first is very different from the end in mind that I have now. And I don't know what it will be again another 20 years down the lane if we have another meeting like this and I'm asked to talk. So the frame of reference, the paradigm shift keeps happening all through life. And being born in this Bharata Bhumi, every one of us has, this message is internalized. My mother never taught it me consciously. It is internalized. So அந்த குருஜி பழையபடி சுவாமிஜிக்கு வரேன். அவர் என்ன சொன்னார்னா, மனிதனாக பிறப்பது கடவுள் வந்து பவர் ஆஃப் டிஸ்கிரிமினேஷன் அப்படின்னு ஒன்று கொடுக்கறது எதுக்குன்னா, டு அட்டைன் சால்வேஷன் அண்ட் எஸ்கேப் ஃப்ரம் திஸ் சர்க்கிள் ஆஃப் பர்த் அண்ட் டெத், கோ பேக் டு யுவர் ஒரிஜினல் ஹோம். அண்ட் த சோல் வென் இட் லுக்ஸ் அட் earth from above knows that the only chance at this real end, to attempt achieving it is by being born in India and nowhere else in the world. So they all try, when they're there, to get into India, and India is populated. That's why we're overtaking China. இதை கேட்டோன்னே எனக்கு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமா இருந்துச்சு. So this is something that we Indians are very clever at. எப்பவுமே வந்து claiming our spiritual superiority, our philosophical superiority, talking about past achievements, feeling good about it. But finally a time has come when, as again Dr. Aravind was pointing out, Tata employs more UK citizens. So now we are proving that we can hold good or stand good in the other areas also, and that too with the philosophy of a company like Tata's, a company that is centered in values, forgetting Nadia for the time being. So that is how the system works, beginning with the end in mind. I have another 10 minutes? Right. So this being the case, coming again to the end in mind that Stephen Covey is talking about, why is he asking us to undergo this exercise? This is to re-emphasize the importance of being principle centered. The core has to be character ethic and not personality ethic. Whatever I do through my power of discrimination has to point me towards the direction of righteousness. So indirectly, மறைமுகமாக அவர் என்ன பண்ணிட்டு இருக்காருன்னா, நம்மளை வந்து அந்த சால்வேஷன் பாதையை நோக்கி தள்ளுறதுக்கான வழியை கொடுத்துருக்காருங்கிறத வந்து நான் நம்புகிறேன். And I would like to quote a very favorite Tamil hymn of mine from Thevaram, அப்பருடைய தேவாரம். கருவுற்ற நாள் முதலாக உன் பாதமே காண்பதற்கு, கருவுற்ற நாள் முதலாக உன் பாதமே காண்பதற்கு, உருகிற்று என் உள்ளமும் நானும் கிடந்தலந்தை தொழிந்தேன். திருவொற்றி ஊரா திருவாலவாயா திருவாரூரா, ஒரு பற்றிலாமையும் கண்டிரங்காய் கச்சியே ஹம்பனே Chandi Kachi Ehamban at Kanjipuram. But the crux of the song is this. Karutta naal mudalaga un padame kaanbadarku. Now if you take that un padame kaanbadarku, that is the ultimate salvation as the end, when do you begin? You don't begin when you're 20 to 25 years old enough to take up a Stephen Covey, read it, understand it, and then start preaching and practicing, or just preaching which is easy, or practice without preaching which makes more sense. Because my son used to ask me, இவ்வளோ HR போறியா, நீ HRல சொல்றதெல்லாம் நீ வீட்டில் ஃபாலோ பண்ணுறியான்னு கேட்பான் அப்பப்போ. இப்பெல்லாம் தர்ம சங்கடமா நம்ம பிள்ளைங்க வந்து இப்போ ரொம்ப ஓவர் இன்டெலிஜென்ட்டாக இருக்கனால நமக்கு வர வேணாம். I admit to him, it is very difficult to practice all that we preach. அதுக்கு வந்து நம்ம ஞானி லெவலுக்கு போகணுண்டா, அப்படி ஒரு லெவலுக்கு வரப்போ உங்கள் அம்மா வீட்டிலே இருக்க மாட்டேன், பயப்படாத, நான் எங்கேயாவது இமாயமலை மாதிரி போயிடுவேன் அப்படின்னு, உங்களெல்லாம் அப்படி படுத்திட்டு இருக்க மாட்டேன். And you know, the other funny thing about us, whether we preach, whether we practice or not, we want all those we preach to practice. And that starts with the husband and children, or in the husband's case, the wife and children, and that creates a lot of confusion at home. So, if we say that this salvation is the end, then as Upper points out, when does it start? Karuvutta naal mudalaga. The moment the soul enters the womb of the mother, he says that soul has consciousness. It is there in the womb for 10 months, and that 10 months is the most difficult time in the life of a soul. Now, all of us are souls. So, when does our life start? Day one in the womb of the mother, where everything is dark, you can't see light, you want somebody to hear you, you want to cry, but there's nobody, and you're left. That's your solitary confinement, as Nelson Mandela was put. You are also given a solitary confinement there, and there the only thing you think and contemplate about is God, because He is the only person who can hear you. So this is what Upper tries to convey to us in this hymn. What we are trying to look at here is, when Stephen Covey uses the word, the 7 habits, habit is such a powerful word. If you take a standard English dictionary, the meaning for the word it gives is very simple. An action performed repeatedly is a habit. But it is not that simple. Now, coming back to this power of discrimination, at every point in life we have a choice. Now, one day, a 17-year-old guy chooses to smoke a cigar because of peer pressure. So that is a power of discrimination, a choice made over a single action. But the moment he lets down his guard, the action starts getting repeated. So repeated action becomes a habit. Then you get hooked on for life. So that is a habit. And again, in Indian philosophy, they explain it even further. They say a habit becomes what in Sanskrit is called a vasana. So it gets ingrained in the soul, not just the brain. See, the brain is something that you lose when you're dead, and then when you take a next birth, you're given a new brain. You think the brain is all new? No. The brain carries certain imprints from its previous birth that they call as vasanas, which are nothing but habits. That's why you see there are a couple of righteous parents, the son becomes a thief. Then there is a thieving father who has a righteous son. So how do these things happen? Indian philosophy has answers for everything in explaining, habits as being carried over lifetimes. Now, I personally found this very comforting, because when we bring up children, when they don't listen to us, I blame it on their vasanas, not my ineffectiveness. So herein, habit becomes a very, very powerful word. So when he says 7 habits of highly effective people, it is a deliverance being offered to us. Why? Though Stephen Covey criticized the personality ethic, the personality ethic also helps. There are some things that can go outside in. Now, when Radhasa was speaking, he says, how do you stop worrying? Better stop reading How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. But mind you, I'll share a secret with you. Between, I would say, my 9th standard to my 2nd year of college, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living used to be my Bible. It has helped me, and especially one small technique that Dale Carnegie taught, live in daytight compartments. That was one thing. And one thing that I really liked, suppose something happens and I'm very upset. He says, look at where you will be a year or 2 years from now. Would you be worried about it with the same intensity that you are now? If the answer is no, quit worrying. I practiced it and became all the more better in one small area for that. Similarly, again talking about habits, psychiatrists and psychologists say that habits can be broken and new habits can be formed. Now that is again the power of discrimination or the power of will. For example, when you have alcoholics, you know that they are sent to these AA camps. What do they try to do there? They try to break them out of a habit. That is by giving them to something alternative to do, creating an alternative route pattern in the brain, so to speak. And they say, if you are able to take up something and practice it without a break for 21 days, not for a lifetime or a year or 2 years, just 3 weeks, then it becomes a habit. It is that easy, and I believe in it. If I should again quote a very small instance from my personal experience, due to some health grounds, I went and undertook a naturopathy course for 3 weeks at Bangalore, where coffee and tea is banned. Before that, I used to be a coffee addict. அதாவது ஒரு நாளைக்கு 4 வாட்டி ஃபில்டரில் டிகாஷன் போடுவேன். ஏன்னா எனக்கு அப்போ போட்டு அப்போ குடிக்கணும். அப்போ போட்டு ராத்திரி 10 மணிக்கெலாம் டிகாஷன் போடுவேன். எங்கள் வீட்டுக்காரர் கேட்பார், பைத்தியமா உனக்குன்னு. But after having had this problem and I went there, the first 3 days I felt like I was going mad, no better than an alcoholic without the coffee. But coming back after 21 days, I broke out of the habit. So that is the beauty about a habit. Just as a habit can influence us and come on to the next life with us, so can we break the habit